Hello, travelers of time. Welcome to perhaps our most ambitious journey yet. Before we begin this epic voyage through all of human history, I'd love to know, where are you listening from right now? What time is it in your corner of the world? Drop a comment below. Tonight, we're going to traverse thousands of years together, and there's something beautiful about knowing that people across the globe are settling in for this same incredible journey through time. If you're new here, welcome. Please consider subscribing, because tonight we're attempting something extraordinary, telling the entire story of human civilization in a way that's both comprehensive and soothing, educational and relaxing. And if you're returning, thank you. Your presence makes these journeys meaningful. Tonight, we're going to travel from the very beginning of human society to the modern world. We'll watch as our ancestors discovered fire, built the first cities, created empires that spanned continents, developed science and art and philosophy, and gradually transformed our planet into the interconnected world we know today. This is the story of humanity's long, difficult, beautiful journey from cave paintings to space exploration. It's a story of innovation and destruction, of wisdom and folly, of countless individuals whose names we'll never know but whose contributions made everything possible. So settle in, get comfortable, dim the lights. We have a lot of ground to cover, but we're going to take our time, letting each era wash over us like waves on an ancient shore. This is the complete history of human civilizations, and it begins in darkness. Imagine standing on the African savanna roughly 300,000 years ago. You're one of the first anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, emerging in what is now Ethiopia. You look essentially like humans today, but the world around you is radically different. There are no cities, no farms, no permanent settlements of any kind. Your entire world consists of perhaps 50 to 150 people, your tribe. You survive by hunting animals and gathering plants, moving constantly to follow food sources. Your life expectancy is perhaps 30 years. Most children die before age 5. Yet you're already remarkable. Unlike any species before you, your brain can think symbolically, can plan for the future, can communicate complex ideas through language. These abilities will change everything. For tens of thousands of years, humans remained hunter-gatherers, living in small nomadic bands, slowly spreading from Africa to populate the entire globe. By 70,000 years ago, humans had reached Asia. By 45,000 years ago, they'd reached Australia. By 15,000 years ago, they'd crossed into the Americas. This diaspora, this spreading across the world, was humanity's first great achievement. Our ancestors walked across continents, survived ice ages, adapted to deserts and jungles and Arctic tundra. They developed sophisticated tools, created art, buried their dead with ceremony, suggesting they developed religious or spiritual beliefs. Cave paintings from this era, like those at Lascaux in France or Altamira in Spain, reveal minds that could think abstractly, that found meaning in symbols, that wanted to express something beyond mere survival. These weren't just humans. These were artists, storytellers, people who wondered about their place in the cosmos. But the true revolution was still to come. Around 12,000 years ago, in a region we now call the Fertile Crescent, modern-day Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, and parts of Turkey and Iran, something extraordinary happened. Humans began to farm. This agricultural revolution transformed everything. Instead of following wild herds and foraging for wild plants, people began deliberately planting crops and domesticating animals. They grew wheat and barley. They herded sheep and goats. And because farming produced more food than hunting and gathering, they could stay in one place. The first permanent settlements appeared. Villages of mud brick houses where hundreds of people lived together. These weren't tribes anymore. They were communities of strangers who had to develop new ways of organizing society, new rules for living together. One of the earliest was Jericho, founded around 9000 BCE, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities on Earth. Another was Çatalhöyük in modern Turkey, where by 700 BCE, up to 10,000 people lived in houses built so close together that people entered through holes in the roof. Agriculture allowed population growth. A farming family could support more children than a nomadic one. Human population, which had remained relatively small for hundreds of thousands of years, began to grow exponentially. But agriculture also created new problems. Farmers needed to defend their fields and food stores from raiders. They needed to coordinate planting and harvesting. They needed to settle disputes over land and resources. They needed leaders, laws, social hierarchies. Human society was becoming complex. By 6,000 years ago, these agricultural communities were growing into something unprecedented: cities. Not villages of hundreds, but cities of thousands, eventually tens of thousands. And with cities came civilization. The word civilization comes from the Latin civitas, meaning city. Civilizations are societies with cities, but they're more than that. They have specialized labor. Not everyone farms. Some people are craftsmen, merchants, soldiers, priests. They have social classes and political hierarchies. They have monumental architecture. They have writing systems to keep records. They have art and religion and law. The first true civilization emerged in Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates in modern Iraq. The Sumerians, around 4,500 BCE, built the world's first cities: Uruk, Ur, Eridu, Lagash. These weren't just large villages. They were urban centers with tens of thousands of inhabitants, massive temple complexes called ziggurats, sophisticated irrigation systems, bronze tools and weapons, wheeled vehicles, and most importantly, writing. Sumerian cuneiform, wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay tablets, is humanity's first writing system, developed around 3,400 BCE. At first, it was just for record-keeping: how much grain in the storehouse, how many sheep in the herd. But writing would become humanity's most powerful tool, allowing knowledge to accumulate across generations, allowing the dead to speak to the living, allowing civilization itself to become possible. Sumerian cities were governed by priest-kings who claimed divine authority. They worshipped gods who controlled natural forces: the sky god Anu, the storm god Enlil, the water god Enki. They developed mathematics based on the number 60, which is why we still have 60 seconds in a minute and 360 degrees in a circle. They created literature. The Epic of Gilgamesh, written around 2100 BCE, is one of humanity's oldest surviving stories. A tale of friendship, mortality, and the search for immortality that still resonates today. But Sumerian cities constantly fought each other over water and land. Around 2350 BCE, a military leader named Sargon of Akkad conquered them all, creating history's first empire. A large multi-ethnic state ruled from a central authority. The Akkadian Empire lasted only about 200 years before collapsing into chaos, but it established a pattern that would repeat throughout history. Individual cities or kingdoms would be conquered and unified into empires, which would eventually fragment, only to be replaced by new empires. While Mesopotamia was developing urban civilization, something similar was happening along the Nile River in Egypt. Around 3100 BCE, Upper and Lower Egypt were unified under the first pharaoh, creating a civilization that would last for 3,000 years. Ancient Egypt was defined by the Nile's annual flooding, which deposited rich soil perfect for agriculture. Egyptian civilization was incredibly stable, maintaining the same basic religious beliefs, social structure, and artistic style for millennia. They believed their pharaohs were living gods, intermediaries between humans and the divine. They built massive monuments. The pyramids at Giza, constructed around 2560 BCE, were the tallest structures in the world for over 3,800 years. Egyptian civilization gave us hieroglyphic writing, advanced medicine, sophisticated mathematics, and a complex afterlife theology centered on preserving the body through mummification. They believed death wasn't an end but a transition to another form of existence, and they prepared for it obsessively. To the east, along the Indus River in modern Pakistan and northwestern India, another early civilization emerged around 2600 BCE. The Indus Valley Civilization built remarkably planned cities, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, with sophisticated drainage systems, standardized brick sizes, and evidence of extensive trade networks reaching Mesopotamia. We know less about them because we haven't deciphered their writing system. They left no obvious temples or palaces, suggesting perhaps a less hierarchical society than Egypt or Mesopotamia. Around 1900 BCE, their cities were mysteriously abandoned, possibly due to climate change or the drying of the Sarasvati River. And in China, along the Yellow River, the first Chinese dynasties emerged. The Xia dynasty, possibly legendary, supposedly began around 2070 BCE. The Shang dynasty, definitely historical, ruled from about 1600 to 1046 BCE. They developed Chinese writing, characters that evolved into modern Chinese script, and bronze casting techniques of extraordinary sophistication. Chinese civilization would develop largely independently from Western civilizations, creating its own philosophical traditions, its own writing system, its own technological innovations. The isolation created by geography, mountains, deserts, and ocean allowed Chinese culture to evolve uniquely. By 1200 BCE, civilization was flourishing in multiple regions, but it was about to be tested. Around this time, the Bronze Age world experienced catastrophic collapse. Within a few decades, many of the great civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean, the Mycenaeans in Greece, the Hittites in Anatolia, the Canaanites in the Levant, fell into darkness. Historians call it the Bronze Age collapse. Cities were destroyed and abandoned. Writing systems were lost. International trade networks collapsed. Population declined dramatically. We don't know exactly why. Theories include earthquakes, drought, invasions by mysterious sea peoples, or systemic economic failures. Likely it was a combination of factors, a perfect storm of catastrophes. The Mediterranean entered a dark age, lasting several centuries. But from these ashes, new civilizations would emerge. In the Levant, small kingdoms developed, including ancient Israel and Judah. The Hebrew Bible was composed during this period, recording religious and historical traditions that would profoundly influence Western civilization through Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. In Greece, city-states emerged around 800 BCE, Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes. Greek civilization was different from earlier civilizations. There was no single ruler, no unified empire. Instead, hundreds of independent city-states, each with its own government, competed and cooperated. Greek thinkers began questioning traditional explanations of the world. Rather than accepting mythology, philosophers like Thales, Pythagoras, and Heraclitus sought natural explanations for natural phenomena. This was the birth of philosophy and science, the systematic attempt to understand reality through reason and observation. The Greeks developed democracy in Athens, not our modern democracy, but a system where free male citizens could vote directly on laws and policies. They created drama, tragedy, and comedy as art forms. They wrote history as a discipline, attempting to explain causes and effects rather than just recording events. They developed mathematics and geometry to sophisticated levels. Greek culture spread through colonization. Greeks established cities throughout the Mediterranean and through conquest. In 336 BCE, Alexander the Great of Macedon began conquering everything in sight. By his death in 323 BCE at age 32, he'd created an empire stretching from Greece to Egypt to India. Alexander's empire fragmented immediately after his death, but his conquests spread Greek culture, what historians call Hellenistic culture, across the known world. Greek became the international language of the Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East. Greek philosophy, art, and science influenced every civilization they touched. While Alexander was conquering the East, a new power was rising in Italy, Rome. Founded according to legend in 753 BCE, Rome began as a small city-state but gradually conquered its neighbors, then all of Italy, then the entire Mediterranean world. By 27 BCE, Rome had transformed from a republic into an empire under Augustus Caesar. The Roman Empire at its height around 117 CE stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia, from the Rhine and Danube rivers to the Sahara Desert, encompassing perhaps 70 million people, roughly 21% of the world's population. Roman civilization gave us so much. Roman law, the basis for many modern legal systems. Latin, the foundation of the Romance languages, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian. Engineering marvels, aqueducts, roads, bridges, the Colosseum, the Pantheon. A vast trade network connecting Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, and through intermediaries even China. Rome provided stability, what historians call the Pax Romana, Roman peace. For about 200 years, from 27 BCE to 180 CE, the Mediterranean world was mostly peaceful and prosperous. Trade flourished. Cities grew. Knowledge accumulated. But empires don't last forever. By the 3rd century CE, Rome was in crisis. Economic problems, political instability, pressure from Germanic tribes along the northern borders, and devastating plagues. In 313 CE, Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity, which had been a persecuted sect. By 380 CE, Christianity was the official religion of the empire. In 395 CE, the Roman Empire split into eastern and western halves. The Western Roman Empire, constantly attacked by Germanic tribes, gradually weakened. In 476 CE, the last Western Roman emperor was deposed. The Western Empire was gone, though the Eastern Empire, what we call the Byzantine Empire, would continue for another 1,000 years. Western Europe entered what used to be called the Dark Ages, though modern historians prefer early Middle Ages because it wasn't as dark as once thought. Roman infrastructure decayed. Cities shrank. Long-distance trade declined. Literacy declined. But this wasn't a complete collapse. It was a transformation. Christianity became the unifying force in Europe. The Catholic Church, headquartered in Rome, provided the only institution spanning multiple kingdoms. Monasteries preserved ancient texts, though in limited quantities. Political power was fragmented among countless kingdoms, duchies, and feudal lords. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, a new civilization was emerging. In 610 CE, a merchant in Mecca named Muhammad began preaching a new monotheistic religion, Islam. Within a century of Muhammad's death in 632 CE, his followers had created an empire stretching from Spain to Central Asia. The Islamic Golden Age, from roughly the 8th to 14th centuries, saw extraordinary achievements. Muslim scholars translated and preserved Greek and Roman texts that might otherwise have been lost. They made original contributions to mathematics, giving us algebra and algorithms. They advanced astronomy, medicine, chemistry, and philosophy. Cities like Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba became centers of learning rivaling anything in history. Islamic civilization connected East and West, facilitating trade and cultural exchange across Eurasia and Africa. The Silk Road trade routes brought Chinese silk, Indian spices, Persian carpets, and African gold to Mediterranean ports, while Islamic merchants spread their religion and culture. In India, various empires rose and fell: the Maurya Empire, the Gupta Empire, regional kingdoms. Buddhism, born in India around 500 BCE, spread throughout Asia, profoundly influencing civilizations from Sri Lanka to Japan. Hinduism evolved into its classical form. Indian mathematicians developed the decimal system and the concept of zero, revolutionary innovations that would transform mathematics. China experienced cycles of unity and fragmentation. The Han Dynasty, 206 BCE to 220 CE, was a golden age, contemporary with Rome, with similar achievements in technology, art, and government. After its fall, China fragmented into competing kingdoms before being reunified by the Sui and then Tang dynasties. The Tang Dynasty, 618 to 907 CE, was perhaps China's most cosmopolitan era, when the capital Chang'an was the world's largest city, when Buddhism flourished, when Chinese poetry reached its height with poets like Li Bai and Du Fu. The Song Dynasty, 960–1279, saw remarkable technological innovation: gunpowder, the compass, movable type printing, inventions that would later transform Europe. And then came the Mongols. In the early 13th century, Genghis Khan united the Mongol tribes and began the most rapid conquest in history. By the time his empire reached its maximum extent under his grandson Kublai Khan, it stretched from Eastern Europe to the Sea of Japan, from Siberia to Southeast Asia, the largest contiguous land empire in history. The Mongol conquests were devastating, millions died, but they also created unprecedented connections. The Silk Road was safer than ever before. Ideas, technologies, and goods moved freely. The Black Death, which killed perhaps half of Europe's population in the 14th century, spread along Mongol trade routes. Europe's recovery from the Black Death coincided with profound changes. The Renaissance rebirth, beginning in 14th century Italy, saw renewed interest in classical Greek and Roman culture. Extraordinary artistic achievements by Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael, and revolutionary thinking about human potential and achievement. The invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg around 1440 was perhaps as revolutionary as writing itself. Books became affordable. Knowledge could spread rapidly. Literacy increased. Ideas became harder to suppress. The Protestant Reformation, beginning in 1517 when Martin Luther challenged Catholic Church authority, split Western Christianity and triggered religious wars that would devastate Europe for over a century. But the most world-changing development of the 15th and 16th centuries was European exploration. Portuguese sailors explored Africa's coast, reaching India in 1498. Christopher Columbus, sailing for Spain, reached the Americas in 1492, beginning an exchange that would transform both hemispheres. The Columbian Exchange, the transfer of plants, animals, diseases, and people between the Old World and the New, reshaped the planet. Potatoes, maize, and tomatoes from the Americas transformed Old World agriculture and diet. Wheat, rice, and livestock transformed the Americas. But European diseases, smallpox, measles, typhus, devastated Native American populations, killing perhaps 90% within a century. European powers, Spain, Portugal, England, France, the Netherlands, established colonies throughout the Americas, Africa, and Asia. This created the first truly global economy, but it was built on slavery and exploitation. Millions of Africans were enslaved and transported to the Americas. Indigenous peoples were conquered, their lands seized, their cultures suppressed. By the 18th century, Europe was experiencing the Enlightenment, a philosophical movement emphasizing reason, science, and individual rights. Thinkers like John Locke, Voltaire, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Immanuel Kant questioned traditional authority and imagined new forms of government based on consent rather than divine right. These ideas sparked revolutions. The American Revolution, 1775 to 1783, created the first modern democracy based on Enlightenment principles. The French Revolution, 1789 to 1799, abolished the monarchy and attempted to create a republic based on liberty, equality, and fraternity, though it descended into violence before Napoleon Bonaparte seized power. But the most transformative development began quietly in Britain in the late 18th century. The Industrial Revolution. The invention of steam engines, mechanized textile production, iron smelting with coke, and countless other innovations transformed manufacturing. For thousands of years, economic output had been limited by muscle power, human and animal. Now machines could do far more work than any number of people or animals. Factories emerged. People moved from farms to cities seeking work. Urban populations exploded. Railways connected regions, allowing rapid transport of goods and people. Steamships connected continents. The telegraph allowed instant communication across vast distances. The Industrial Revolution created unprecedented wealth, but also unprecedented inequality and harsh working conditions. Workers, including children, labored in dangerous factories for long hours. Cities became overcrowded and polluted. Social reformers began advocating for labor rights, better working conditions, and political representation for working people. The 19th century saw the rapid spread of industrialization beyond Britain to continental Europe, North America, and eventually Japan. It also saw European imperial expansion reach its peak. By 1914, European powers and their former colonies controlled roughly 84% of the world's land surface. This period of European dominance, roughly 1500 to 1945, profoundly shaped the modern world. European languages, legal systems, economic systems, and cultural values spread globally. But this dominance came at enormous cost to colonized peoples, exploitation, cultural destruction, and in some cases, genocide. The 20th century began with optimism. Technology was advancing rapidly. Living standards in industrialized nations were rising. International trade was growing. Many believed human progress was inevitable. Then came World War I, 1914 to 1918. The first industrialized total war killed roughly 20 million people. Empires collapsed: Russian, German, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman. The war's aftermath created conditions for even greater catastrophe. The Russian Revolution of 1917 created the Soviet Union, the first communist state, which would become a global superpower and America's rival for nearly 75 years. Germany, devastated by war and harsh peace terms, fell under Adolf Hitler's Nazi dictatorship in 1933. World War II, 1939 to 1945, was even more devastating. Perhaps 70 to 85 million people died, including roughly 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust, the Nazi regime's systematic attempt to exterminate European Jewry. The war ended with atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, introducing nuclear weapons that could potentially destroy all human civilization. The post-war world was divided between the capitalist West, led by the United States, and the communist East, led by the Soviet Union. This Cold War lasted until 1991, shaping global politics through proxy wars, nuclear arms races, and ideological competition. Decolonization saw the European empires dissolve. India gained independence in 1947. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, African nations achieved independence. By the 1970s, direct European colonial control had largely ended, though its economic and cultural effects persist. The late 20th century saw extraordinary technological advancement. Computers, invented in the 1940s, became personal devices by the 1980s. The Internet, developed in the 1960s for military and academic use, became publicly accessible in the 1990s. The World Wide Web, invented in 1989, transformed how humans communicate, work, and access information. Medicine advanced dramatically. Antibiotics, developed in the 1940s, conquered many bacterial diseases. Vaccines eliminated smallpox entirely and reduced other diseases dramatically. Life expectancy increased globally. Child mortality decreased. The human population, around 1 billion in 1800, reached 6 billion by 1999. The 21st century began with both promise and peril. Globalization connected the world's economies more tightly than ever. Information technology advanced exponentially. Billions gained access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunities their ancestors couldn't imagine. But challenges remained. Climate change threatening the planet's ecosystems, economic inequality within and between nations, political instability and conflict, the risk of nuclear war or biological catastrophe, questions about how to govern artificial intelligence and other powerful technologies. And here we are now, in this moment, part of a story that began 300,000 years ago with the first modern humans in Africa. We're the descendants of everyone who came before, the hunter-gatherers who painted caves, the farmers who founded the first villages, the scribes who developed writing, the philosophers who questioned everything, the artists who created beauty, the scientists who uncovered nature's laws, the countless ordinary people who lived, loved, struggled, and died, each contributing in their own way to the vast tapestry of human civilization. What makes this story remarkable isn't just the achievements, the pyramids, the Great Wall, the Sistine Chapel ceiling, the moon landing. It's the resilience. Civilizations rose and fell. Empires conquered and collapsed. Plagues devastated populations. Wars killed millions. Yet humanity persisted, rebuilt, continued. It's the creativity. From cave paintings to symphonies to cinema, humans have always created art, always sought beauty and meaning beyond mere survival. Every culture, every era, contributed to humanity's artistic legacy. It's the curiosity, the drive to understand, to ask why, to seek explanations, to develop science and philosophy and mathematics, is distinctly human. We're a species that looks at the stars and wonders what's out there, that looks at the world and asks how it works. It's the connection. Despite differences in language, culture, religion, and geography, all humans share the same basic needs, emotions, and aspirations. The Sumerian farmer worried about his harvest as much as the modern farmer. The Egyptian mother loved her children as much as any mother today. The Roman soldier feared death as much as any soldier ever has. We're one species, separated by time and space but connected by our shared humanity. The complete history of human civilizations is ultimately the story of us trying to survive, trying to thrive, trying to create meaning in a vast and often indifferent universe. We've made terrible mistakes: wars, genocides, oppression, environmental destruction. We've created systems of inequality and injustice. We've been cruel to each other in ways large and small. But we've also created beauty, discovered truth, developed compassion, built connections across differences. We've cared for the sick, educated the young, remembered the dead. We've created cultures of extraordinary richness and diversity. We've looked at the universe and made sense of it through mathematics. We've looked at ourselves and tried to become better. The story isn't over. We're still writing it, every day, through our choices and actions. The challenges we face: climate change, inequality, conflict, the management of powerful technologies, are real and serious. But they're not unprecedented. Humans have faced existential threats before and survived, not through individual heroism but through collective effort, cooperation, ingenuity, and hope. That's perhaps the most important lesson from 300,000 years of human history. We're better together than apart. Every great achievement in civilization, from the first cities to the internet, required cooperation, the sharing of knowledge, the collective effort of countless individuals working toward common goals. As you drift off to sleep tonight, remember that you're part of this vast story. Your life, however ordinary it might seem, is connected to everyone who came before and everyone who will come after. The language you speak, the food you eat, the tools you use, the ideas you think, all inherited from thousands of generations of humans who lived, learned, and passed their knowledge forward. You are the temporary custodian of a heritage that stretches back to the dawn of humanity and forward to futures we can barely imagine. That's extraordinary. That's beautiful. And that's the complete history of human civilizations. Our story, told so you can rest easy knowing where we came from and perhaps dream about where we might go. Thank you for joining me on this epic journey through time, travelers. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing for more history that transforms the past into something meaningful for the present. And let me know in the comments, which era or civilization fascinated you most. Until next time, sleep well. Dream of ancient cities rising from river valleys, of ships crossing uncharted oceans, of humans looking at the stars and daring to wonder. Dream of the long, strange, beautiful journey that brought us here, to this moment, together. And remember, you're part of the story. Make it a good one. Music.